Welcome to Pure Conversation. Thanks for joining us for today's podcast. Pure Conversation is co-hosted by me, Joseph Miller.
And me, Darren May. Check out our website, pureconversation.com, for more content and behind-the-scenes looks. Make sure to subscribe. Rate us wherever you listen to podcasts 5 stars, or don't rate us at all. Really appreciate the listen.
Disclaimer, Pure Conversation is an opinion-based podcast. We're not financial consultants, and any financial advice should be purely for entertainment purposes. I'd like to welcome Yaakov Ehrenkranz to the show. Besides being Mishpacha, Yaakov Ehrenkranz is a financial advisor who works with Levinsky Financials offers personalized financial planning and investment services for the multinational businesses living in Israel. Thank you very much for joining us. How are you doing?
I am well, thank you. Thank you very much for having me. It's very nice to be here. Thanks.
Thank you for being here. So let's start off with some questions about you. Can you tell us a little bit about how you got into the financial services, what brought you into the financial world, and then maybe bring that into what that has to do with your position currently in Israel?
I do. My background, I guess I'll go back a little further. I've been interested in finance in general for a long time, including general following the stock market and investing from a young age. Something I learned from my grandmother actually when I was much younger, and when I got an economics degree from YU, and then I was doing some types of money management, options tradings and things for a while. And along the way, I would try to help whatever I could if I had a better understanding than someone else, if I could help them, with their personal finances, whether it's retirement planning or something more near term. And since getting to Israel, I've been doing it more professionally for Levinsky Financial. Here I work for Baruch Levinsky, who has been advising clients for many years and manages money and does a lot of financial consultations. So I have had the opportunity to work for him for the last 2 years. And we do focus on Olim, on people who have come to Israel from other countries, and helping them learn the system here, maximize what they can of the resources, and kind of balance if they still have a dual financial life with, different countries, different currencies, different assets, and different systems. So that's kind of how I got here and what we do now.
Yaakov, that all sounds fantastic. Before we go on, I want to know about your grandmother. Is she should we be speaking to her in the next podcast?
That would be very, very, very difficult. Unfortunately, she's no longer with us, so that's okay. No, she did invest for a long time. My grandfather had a business, and some of, I guess, what he took home, she would invest, and she would show me with the newspaper. I don't know if you guys even done this, but the newspapers used to have on the back page a whole list of quotations with PE ratios, dividend yields, 52-week high and lows, and that is how I remember her teaching me about different companies and how to find out how they've done and where they are. So we could speak to her, but for now, you'll have to just settle for me for now.
Incredible. Really a family affair, Yeah.
Excellent. Thank God.
Are there any areas that you specifically specialize in your position, or is it just broad financials? Meaning, do you focus more on the Israel side? Do you focus more on the dual tax America and Israel? Where do you focus on?
Okay, that's a good question.
Thanks.
I think honestly, it's really, it is pretty general. But for me, it's mostly Americans who are coming to Israel, who are either about to come or are in the process of coming or have just gotten here. And a lot of them still have money in the States, and are trying to figure out, how to take advantage of various zchuyot of rights that you have as an Oleh, but balance the risks and conveniences of being having your money in Israel and America. So a lot of that, whether it's, again, part of it's the Aliyah process. People, sorry, I'll try to make this more misudar. There, one bucket of people is really just the Aliyah process itself. People trying to figure out if they could afford to live in Israel or if they could afford not to live in Israel, and how to get here and see what their budget will be when they get here. And then part of that is also if they have assets in America, whether it's in savings or in retirement accounts, and how to kind of manage that as they come here and start a life here that has its own set of factors. The retirement saving system here is very different than it is there. So again, that's consulting with people as they make Aliyah or as they transition to Israel. From an investment perspective, I'm not licensed to give investment advice yet in Israel. I work for Baruch Levinsky, who is. So I don't, strictly speaking, give investment advice in Israel. I could help people with some of their investment questions, but it's more on a general level. People want to figure out if they have savings in Israel, how to invest it here, but being mindful of some tax ramifications like you referred to, that and other regulations that people need to be aware of and figure out how to navigate as being a U.S. citizen and trying to invest in Israel. So it's a broad spectrum of types of consultation. Lately, I've been doing a lot of people who are closer to retirement age and trying to figure out how to balance what they've accrued in Israeli pensions versus what's in U.S. pensions and the various planning and decisions that have to go with that. So it's pretty broad, but it's mostly U.S. people either living in Israel or on their way to Israel. Baruch, who I work for, is Canadian. If people have he does the U.S. and Canadian background also. And then we have clients that come from the U.K. or South Africa or other places as well. But the U.S. is where I'm probably most familiar.
So Yaakov, so let's say I come to you and I say I live in, let's say, the Tri-State or California or something like that. I'm thinking of making Aliyah, but to Israel. I just have no idea how the financial system works. Am I going to be able to cut it? Let's say I'm keeping my job in America. Let's just assume that my financial income is not going to change that much. So what are sort of the questions? Where do we start seeing if this makes sense for me on a financial level? Like, am I going to be able to support my family? So what are the questions that you would ask, and what are sort of the answers that would allow you to know if this makes financial sense for me or not?
Yeah, that's a good question as well. I mean, part of it, you mentioned a very important detail there. If you were to be keeping your job, so on the one hand, that very often gives someone a very good, start here, because besides that, it might mean coming with income right away, as opposed to someone who has to go through a job hunt. It also, average salaries in America are a lot higher than they are here. An average salary in Israel, 11,000, 12,000 shekel a month, talking about, $30,000, $40,000 a year. It's very low. Part of that is because there's a lot of forced retirement savings here, which in the long run may be good. But just to answer your question, meaning the income is a big part of it. And if someone comes with a U.S. income, there are things they need to think about and figure out in terms of how that income is structured. And, are they just a regular employee getting a W-2 still? And then how do they report that income in Israel? Because if you're sitting here and working, you have to figure out the Israeli tax piece. Perhaps, they can work through a manpower organization or have their own corporation or be an independent contractor. There's a lot of things to figure out, but more to your question about how to think about affording it. So once they know that income piece, it's really, it's kind of like general financial planning, just adapting it for Israel. And it's, well, what is your lifestyle? And, let's see where you want to live and what the rent is for the type of house you want to have. And, certain things are a lot less here, like tuition, but there still is a range. So depending on, what someone's family situation is and what type of school they want to go to and what they expect to have here in terms of, other lifestyle things. A car here is a lot more expensive. It's much more rare to have two cars for a family than it is in the States. And when they get a sense of how they're going to live, which, they probably should be prepared to make certain sacrifices, but also try to keep a standard of living that they're comfortable with. So then we try to help them put a price on it, and whether it's figuring out, buying a house, renting a house, just understanding what their grocery bill will be, what the various, municipal tax, Arnona, things like that, and what their utilities are. And some of it we could kind of take from how they live wherever they are now, and some of it has to be changed. Some of it will be more, some of it will be less, and then hopefully they could figure out if that fits into their income, and without ignoring their long-term savings for retirement or college or weddings or buying a home, all that stuff. So it's all part of a financial plan.
So I was wondering, being that, I guess it's a two-part question. First, what major differences do people have, or what major issues do people have when they make aliyah financially? And then, as a normal financial advisor, you find that people have, bad money habits or issues with insurance or whatever. They usually have difficult managing. So by adding all these new features, all these new difficulties that come into Israel, does that really make it more difficult as a financial advisor, or do you find that that either way, that financial advising is more the same anywhere you go?
That's an interesting question. That's the first one. Honestly, a common thing people have a problem with here is that their incomes are just going to be lower, and that's just a challenge. Again, some of their expenses might be lower also, but that's a major issue. And even if they have a good salary at a good company, what they take home from what they're given. Here things are measured in shekels per month as opposed to dollars per year. So even if someone has a very high salary, 20, 30, 40,000 shekel a month, because there's a lot of legally required retirement savings and the various tax here as well. So what you take home is at the end of the day, it ends up being lower for most people. So that's a very common challenge. From a financial perspective, also housing is a big difference, because here, depending on where you are in the country, but in a lot of places you're not going to be able to find a single family detached home that's you're more likely to have semi-attached or like a duplex or be in a building, even if you were used to being something else in America. And if you want something more like you have, again, depending on the age of when someone's coming and their family situation is, the real estate, depending on where you're coming from, might really be a lot more expensive here or similar for a lot less total space and yard and things like that. So those are the things people, some of the things that end up being challenges, the income and the cost of housing, at least to buy. In terms of financial planning, I think a lot of it's similar. I think the retirement piece here is different because everyone is supposed to be automatically enrolled in a pretty comprehensive retirement program where your employer contributes and you contribute, and there's money put away for severance. So getting a good handle on it is sometimes a little hard, whether you're an American who moved here or an Israeli. The system's sometimes a little bit challenging to just make sure you really understand exactly what's in your pension fund and how much is going in it and what it's going to turn into and what the fees are. So, but have issues like that in America also. I don't know. I think everything's dependent on the person and the situation. I don't know if there's that much more I can think about right now that changes when they come here. The basics people still need. They need their insurance, they need their retirement savings, they need to save for certain things. One other difference in America, I think it's probably pretty common, people try if they can to save for college. Here, college or university is a lot less expensive, but a lot of people try to save for weddings, depending on what what cultural group you're from here. That might mean buying a child an apartment or part of one or part of a down payment, or it's just a major expense that will come up that some people, it's something that Corona might change the price of a wedding in the long term, kind of hopefully make it cheaper. But that's, you have some long-term saving things. So people have them there and they have them here. Just a lot of it's the same, I think.
So you spoke about retirement, and I know that's obviously a huge topic when it comes to personal finance, but just from an American point of view, you've got Social Security, and you might be, you're obviously contributing and your employer is, Then you've got your 401k, you've got your Roth IRA. There's a bunch of different ways to set up a retirement. How does bring the American part to Israel work? Like, let's say a person's worked 20, 30, 40 years in the States, now he's going to Israel. So how does all of that he's accrued work from one country to the other? Is he going to receive his Social Security checks? Like I remember, Jack Bogle would talk about that you can, when you're planning your retirement, you look at what are your, stocks versus bonds, but you don't actually need as many bonds as you think because you're relying on that a certain, chunk of your income is going to be Social Security. I don't know if people, my age in their mid-20s are really relying on that, but a lot of people in America are relying on Social Security for their retirement. So, like, how does that work going to Israel? And then if you're not coming, having accrued that, if you're coming from a younger age, sort of how does it work transitioning into the Israeli system and then working through that?
Right. Okay. Good question. So this could work a lot of ways. And like you pointed out, it really does depend on what age you come. And if you come very close to retirement, it's pretty good, actually. You'll get your full Social Security. You could even have a direct deposit in your Israeli bank account in shekels at a good exchange rate. And for a lot of people who worked a full career in America, for a lot of people, they could come here and really live on that. Obviously, it depends on if they're selling a house and buying one here, if they're renting, and how they live, et cetera. But for a couple coming with Social Security checks, it goes a long way here. And I'm not a CPA, but there's some tax advantages. Once you're here, you might end up even paying less total tax than you would have if you been in America. So there's a lot of things to look into there. If you come in the beginning of your career and you're most likely not going to have Social Security unless you are working as an independent and paying self-employment tax, which would end up putting you in a lot of high tax rate. You'd end up paying Social Security tax and pay money on it here in Israel. That's not something that there's a tax treaty that covers as of now. Whatever, that's a separate topic. But you'd basically be relying on your Israeli retirement savings and Bituach Leumi, which it's like Social Security, but it's a lot less. I mean, it's about the equivalent in shekels, not the equivalent. Meaning, if you were going to make $3,000 a month in Social Security, you might make 3,000 shekels a month in Bituach Leumi or something like that. Maybe not even that much. So that's part of it. But from when you start working here, you have a good chunk of your salary is going into a retirement account. And that's supposed to fund a lot of your retirement. It doesn't necessarily mean you don't have to save on your own, but something around 20% of your salary, about 6 or 7% from the employee side, and another 13, 14% from the employer side, above what he's giving you, is going into a retirement account. And those type of pensia, it's called. There's a lot of different types. There's some of it, you could choose what's being invested. Some of it has government guaranteed types of investments. It has you could have it with insurance in it that has a certain type of life and disability insurance in it. But if you really work a long time, even if you start with a low salary and just work your way up slowly, a lot of money will go into it, which is why it's important for people who are coming here and going to work here to really understand the fees that they're paying and the investments that they're in and the insurance that they have there to make sure it's appropriate for them. And it should be able to, go a long way in terms of retirement. And then if people are able to save and invest separately, then just like they would in America, they could do that. And then just to jump back for 1 second, the other retirement savings someone has in America is also, whether it's 401ks or IRAs, you would treat it a lot similarly. There's some interesting tax questions. What would get reported where, and the differences between Roth and traditional, how it would translate here in terms of Israeli tax. But there are a lot of questions to work out. But if you came in the middle of your career or at the end and you had those accounts, you certainly wouldn't lose them. You wouldn't need to take them out early, hopefully, and you would hopefully let them grow and take them out in retirement. But being cognizant of the fact that if your investments are still in dollars and you're going to live a life in shekels, you have to keep that in mind as well. Because even if your investments do well, if there are big moves, the dollar shekel rate, that's going to impact how far it'll go here. But yeah, so that's what I have to say about that, I think.
The biggest fears for me, or that I would have going to Israel, would be that with a lot of these things you mentioned, and on top of regular things like in America, if I get a mortgage, I can read the mortgage. I can understand it. Same thing with taxes. Same things with a lot of different aspects of financial plan, like Social Security. As complex as it probably is here, I can figure it out. So, but for someone who's even an expert in speaking Hebrew, how are they supposed to navigate all these financial documents if they're all in Hebrew? Meaning, even if you can speak fluent, that doesn't mean you can necessarily understand these more financial terms in Hebrew.
They call Levinsky financial. It's a good question. I mean, the truth is, as the Oled community has grown, I live in Beit Shemesh, where there's a lot of Olim, but the same in Jerusalem and Modi and other places, there's a lot of Olim and professional service providers, help with exactly those things. It's a very good point that you mentioned. And, there's a lot of U.S. accountants who focus on expat tax. I tell people sometimes, even if they have their really good accountant from the States who is probably an expert in what he does and, very competent, but you need someone who understands and who focuses on as an expert in your situation. So in Israel, whether it's, those U.S. accountants who focus on expats or English-speaking Israeli accountants or mortgage brokers, and maybe there are things that you might have been able to do a little easier on your own in the States that you'll have to rely on someone and pay someone to help you with, whether it's your car insurance or your pension or your mortgage. You do have to sometimes rely on others and pay professionals to help you. That being said, the institutions here do try. I mean, the banks, they will try to help and have things in English. I mean, there's certain things they need to be compliant with some U.S. regulations, but they do try. And there's also, a lot of things online and groups that help people understand. There's books but yeah, it's definitely something that people is a challenge sometimes, and hopefully we can help them, or other people can help them to make sure they get what they need in the best way.
So I think Joseph actually hit on and you as well, Yaakov, you hit on a very good point that if you're going to have money in multiple countries, so a huge piece of the puzzle is the exchange rate. So like I know, for example, my family's from South Africa, and people are very nervous there about, the currency. It's inflated. I think it's lost half of its value in the last 10 years. So like a lot of people are pouring money into other English-speaking countries like Australia and England if they have the money to do so. If a person's going to have money in multiple countries, like in America and Israel, let's say, it's just like a simple example, how do you navigate the fear of like maybe the dollar is going to go to not, at least, the dollar typically is a relatively stable currency as opposed to some other countries, but like especially if you're coming, let's say, from like we were talking about South Africa or another country like that, how do you navigate having your money in multiple currencies in multiple countries? What do you typically recommend on that front?
Okay, that's yeah. I mean, I think it is case by case. It depends on a few things. On the one hand, there are people who could afford to have a little more of exposure to currency, meaning to currency foreign exchange risk, meaning if someone basically covers their expenses and their shekel salary, and they have a retirement plan in shekels, and they also just have some investments in the U.S. in dollars, so they could just say, okay, that's a risk I'm going to take. The U.S. stock market might have advantages. They might have a more customer service friendly brokerage. They might have cheaper fees. They might have a greater familiarity or some tax advantages investing there, and they'll just hope and or decide that's a good risk to take, is that the convenience and whatever advantages there are of investing there will outweigh whatever risk there are in currency. Technically, there are ways to hedge it if you want to try to do that with a bank or at a brokerage. It's a little complicated. I don't think most people will end up doing it that way, but it's possible. If someone can afford to take the risk, and they just have to decide. And that's how we tell people. No one knows where the currency markets are going. When we see that it's noticeably strong, if the shekel now is at 3.4, which is a lower rate than it's at the low end of a rate, range. If you don't need to move over now, maybe it's better not to. It's true, it could go lower, but maybe it's better not to. When it gets up to 3.7, 3.75, 3.8, I don't know. I mean, don't take this, and run with it. But just, when it's higher, then it's maybe a good time to bring some over here, especially if you'll need it soon. But if you could afford it, so you make those decisions. If you want to buy a house soon and you have just enough now in shekels, then, at the end of the day, whether you convert it or don't convert it, you're taking a risk. If you convert it and it goes up later, you would have had more. And if you don't convert it and it goes down, it's always a risk. If we knew the future, we'd be very wealthy in terms of, what we would do with it. But, it's important for people to recognize it. And that's what I mostly tell people, and to know what they really need, and then what they could afford to be, take more risks on. There's no silver bullet there. I don't think we have any great solutions to totally mitigate the risk. It's just that it's case by case to figure out who could afford to take a little more risk and who really needs to do more sooner.
Got it. And in regards to investments, we mentioned different areas where you could keep money or language. What about investments? Do you find that, or do your services provide investment advice for Israel, or do they still focus on more of investment and money management in American assets?
So we do a lot of Israeli investments and U.S. and a special niche for the people that have both and want to make sure that who's managing their money sees both and knows how to make sure you're not having duplicate holdings and make sure things are balanced. Baruch, who I work for, is a licensed portfolio manager here. And we work, here most investing is done, a lot of it is done through your regular bank. And you have a bank account with checking and savings, and you have your investment account there. And we do invest a lot of shekel investments. Even in those accounts, we could have dollar products also, but we definitely do a lot of both. I mean, I personally, admittedly, am still more familiar with the investment landscape in the U.S. and the products that are there. So, I may help out a little more on that part, but we definitely do both. Two things to mention that are important. One that relates to this, and the other one, I'm sorry, I have to jump back to something we talked about, Social Security, for a minute. But on the investment end, for Americans, there is a regulation related to what's called the PFIC, PFIC, which is a passive foreign investment company. And basically, the U.S., just like you have to report taxes every year, you have to report if you are investing in a passive foreign investment company, which most mutual funds or ETFs here are. So, a regular non-U.S. citizen could go into a bank and just say, please just give me some mutual funds, and there has an investment person at the bank who could help you, and you'll pay a small fee, and then you'll buy it and hopefully hold it for long term. Americans often want to avoid these PFICs, so they might come to someone like us if you buy direct stocks or bonds, then you don't have that issue. So that's one reason we get a lot of business, because people who have savings here who want to avoid that issue, because it could be an expensive issue to have, because you have to pay your accountant more every year to take care of this. It's a relatively complicated reporting issue, and could be a lot higher tax than there would otherwise also be. So that's an important thing. I'm sorry to jump back. It occurred to me that I forgot to mention when we were talking before about Social Security. I mentioned that if you come close to Social Security, you could really get your Social Security here, no problem. If you come at the beginning of your career, you probably won't have Social Security. I meant to mention that if you come in the middle of your career, it's a little more complicated, because the reason I remember this is some of these acronyms that are together in my head. So PFIC is one. Another one is WEP, which is WEP, which is it's important for someone to know what that is. That's the windfall elimination provision. It's just something if you came and you earned some Social Security, but then you also had a career that you were being paid and the wages were not subject to Social Security. It could be someone working in America in a job that's not subject to Social Security tax. Certain municipal or state jobs might not have it, or certain railroad jobs, different jobs used to not have. They had their own pension system. And similarly, if you come to Israel or a different country where you're not being paid on a W-2 and you're not, reporting self-employment, you just work for a regular employer here. So then you have a lot of years of earnings that are not subject to Social Security tax. And you go into the details. I'm not sure it's necessary. It's just something that people be aware of. Eventually, what could happen is the windfall elimination provision basically makes it that your Social Security is reduced. Even if your statement says you were going to make, $2,000 a month based on your half of a career in America, if you also came here and worked and you earn a pension here that you earned while you weren't in the Social Security system, and that's another $1,000 a month. So your Social Security will be reduced by maybe $500 a month. There's a calculator, and it depends on a lot of different things. You could Google around and look into it more, but it's just an important thing to realize. These are some of the things that when Americans come here, they just need to know about. That WEP will impact their Social Security, that PFIC will impact their kind of investment options, or how simple it will be to invest here. These are the things we deal with here, and that Americans in particular need to be aware
of. So it sounds like it's really easiest to go if you're either at the beginning or end of your career, but the middle you have quite a lot of things to deal with. Like you're kind of one foot in both worlds.
Listen, every stage of life coming here would be different challenges. When you're coming in the middle of your career, your kids might also be older, and the transition might be harder too. Strictly speaking, financially, it might be fine. It's just that you just have to be aware of these things. We don't want to discourage anyone from coming. Even if you've worked half a career and you've saved up a lot, and that's the way you could afford to come, that's also great. You just have to be aware. That's all. It's not But yeah, each stage of life coming has its own pros and cons. Hopefully, the pros will always outweigh the cons. But yeah, there definitely are different stages that make it different in each case.
So, what are some of the pros?
There's a lot of pros of living here. Financially, there's cheaper tuition. It's always good. Healthcare is cheaper here also, but it's not as clear cut. You don't pay high premiums, so to speak, directly to your providers or to your insurance company, but you do have a high amount of tax on your a special mas briyut that comes out depending on how much money you make. It might end up being pretty expensive. So financially, those are some of them. I don't know how far we want to go away from financial, but there's a lot of pros in living here, especially as a Jewish person, specifically as a religious person. The schedule is built around the Jewish schedule, and the schools are all built on that, and the vacation days and everything like that. It's all going based on Jewish holidays and Yom Tov and things like that. It's you're much more at home. You're not you're it is home. At the end of the day, that's the pro. It's your home. It's where you're supposed to be. But there's a lot of good things here. Thank God.
I like how you said when you said religious reasons, you said because like work schedules around your religion and school schedules around your religion, and then you said also it's your home.
Right. No, the point is that it's much more natural living. It's what it's supposed to be. It's anyway. Yeah, there's different ways you could go with it, but there's a lot of pros.
Do you find that people have a hard time adjusting to sort of like downgrading their standard of living, if they have to?
And also, if you could share some personal experience.
Yeah, definitely a lot of people have to, in terms of the size of the house they live in, or the types of cars, or how many cars they have, and things like that. And there are people that move back. Sometimes they move back because they can't afford to buy a house here. And it's if you're comparing Israel to New York or Toronto or LA, maybe it's not crazy expensive. But if you're I'm from Memphis, Tennessee, you could buy a lot more house for what you could get for you have to pay for the house here. So those are, I think some of those things are challenges. I think the retention rate here is very high. I mean, I think most people are happy, even though they have to make some sacrifices in terms of their lifestyle. But the country continues to develop, where there's still a lot of amenities available here now. Whether it's for people who like to go to restaurants, there's a lot of restaurants here now. It wasn't always the case that there was high quality things like that. Vacations, these things are different here than they are there, but we continue to develop here, and there's still a lot of opportunity. I'm sure I don't want to downplay it. There are challenges, especially for people who don't speak Hebrew well, and I think for them their careers might be a real challenge, and finding the right job that pays a livable wage or a satisfying wage is I think a challenge a lot of people have. But I don't know the exact statistics, but I think in general people they stay, their kids are happy, and if they're making sacrifices, they find them to be worthwhile.
You mentioned that you've been doing this for 2 years now, what that means to me is that like a quarter of the time you've been doing this has been the coronavirus. So how has that affected, let's say, your earlier clients, and how has that been affecting new clients?
Okay, that's a tough question. That's good. There's some technical things, and then there's some bigger financial things. Everyone who, like, of our clients that we manage money for, so obviously they experienced a lot of volatility. The U.S. markets have recovered. Israel hasn't quite yet. So that's one thing that's come up. People have seen their assets fluctuate a lot more than they would like to. Like I said, technically, we used to do a lot of in-person meetings. That's how we used to always do consulting. And every now and then we'd use Zoom or something similar, Skype. Now it's entirely, we only meet on Skype and Zoom now. So, there's things like that. There was a wake-up call to people during Corona. Unfortunately, there's been still is a lot of unemployment and small businesses that were hurt. And, it reinforced some of the things that financial advisors tell people a lot in terms of having a emergency fund. And it was kind of a little bit of a reset for a lot of people where they wanted to make sure that they're really doing things smartly and, on track to meet their financial goals, whatever they are. So, we've seen a bunch of new clients from that end. We've seen a lot of Aliyah inquiries that for one reason or another, this has been an awakening for some people with, the various things going on in the States. A lot of people have, wanted to explore Aliyah more. Some people want to explore it just for their money. Maybe they should just send money here to invest, and so they'll eventually be able to come here. I don't know. It's been different things like that. There's some people have taken the opportunity to try to get things done. Some people have been hit with real challenges, and sometimes they turn to us. We try to help people when they can, just to meet whatever their situation is now. It's not just to help people invest all their riches. It's also to help people just make sure they're living on a budget and could, if people they have here in your bank, you could go into what's called minus, and you could be an overdraft. And we want to help people get in better habits where they're not an overdraft and they're living within their means, and if possible, to have enough income to really cover their expenses and save. So it's been just a good time for people to think about things and hopefully do some.
Just two quick questions. One, just to follow up on that, on the whole Corona discussion. Has there been any stimulus? Like I know in the States we've had a bunch of different for businesses and for individuals. Has there been any stimulus? And if there is, does it matter at all if you're an Oleh? If you just move there, does that affect you getting the stimulus in any way?
I'll just tag on, and also if you have dual citizenships, can you get both, or do you only get one?
Yeah. So first of all, good questions. They have had some here at towards the beginning of the whole pandemic. They gave out some money. Again, kind of what they gave there in dollars, they gave here in shekels up to a certain limit. 500 shekel per child, or certain senior citizens got some. Just right now, they've issued a new, passed another stimulus type bill or whatever, and they've given out some more money per child and per adult this time. And yes, for those who are American citizens, I'm not going to say everyone, came out, rich from it. Some people lost a lot of their income, but you could have gotten and presumably get the next, if there is one, U.S. stimulus as well. To the same extent that they got it there. In terms of whether New Olim, as far as I know, New Olim had the same benefits and stimulus as anyone who's been here longer. There are a few complications, like some of what they've done, like I know is being discussed there in terms of the unemployment rules and eligibility. So if someone had come recently and hadn't been working that long, whether they'll be eligible for unemployment and things like that. I think they made sure to take care of the Olim there also. There might be cases where someone, got stuck a little bit, but and that would be terrible. But the Gadol, I do know that they tried and they made a lot of changes that allowed for more eligibility and increased unemployment when they could. So yeah, they've done a lot. And they're trying, and hopefully we'll turn a corner soon.
And just one, I think, we're looking to wrap this up soon, but one last question is, we're talking a lot about coming to Israel. A lot of people are not going to come to Israel, but they might still have, a little money to invest, and they might want to put it into Israel. Do you ever get people who are interested in that sort of thing? And does it make sense for people, or, is it a good idea to invest in the Israeli market, whether it's real estate or bonds or stocks or whatever other assets there might be? And how would you go about doing that?
Right. Okay. I mean, I don't want to give formal investment advice, but I'll just speak generally.
If you could name a top 10 list of which stocks.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's definitely important to think about, if you think certain sectors here are going to be long-term, a lot of potential, then you could try to find ways to invest in them. It's not the investment landscape here is really not as robust as it is in the U.S. I mean, there are ETFs and mutual funds, but not nearly as many as there are there. So there are ways. For a U.S. citizen who doesn't live here, it's not so simple to have an investment account here. You could have at certain brokerages that there are either ETFs on the U.S. exchanges that invest in Israel or that track Israeli exchanges, but you kind of have to really look into if those are if the holdings of those indices are really the companies you want to be investing in Israel. I'm not saying they're not. I'm just saying if someone thinks they're investing in the high-tech startup nation and they're buying the Tel Aviv, 30 or whatever it is, and it's mostly insurance companies or Teva or whatever, you just have to know what you're getting. In general, I think the Israeli economy, until Corona had been doing well, and we certainly hope it continues to, and hope that will be reflected in the long-term performance of the stock market. But, I don't have specific investment advice for someone. And there's real estate also. I mean, it's always done really well here. No one knows, whether that's going to end ever, will plateau, or, will all the increased aliyah make it so that it just keeps going up and up more as, rich Americans come with their money and bid up the prices of houses? We really don't know. It's possible to buy real estate here as a U.S. citizen. There are different rules, and the amount you need to put down and what the taxes are all different. But there are ways to do it. It is something we help with people with sometimes when they're interested, and if they believe in it, or especially if they think they're going to come here eventually, then if we could do it in a way that makes sense, then yeah, that'd be great.
How could people reach out to you if they have more questions?
Okay, yeah, I was certainly welcome to email me, Yaakov at Levinsky.com, Yaakov at Levinsky, LABINSKY.com. We have a website, Levinsky.com, that they could reach out to us through there. They're welcome to call. All of our contact information is there. And if there's any way we could help, we'd be happy to.
Do you have any last points you want to tell us about maybe what might be helpful for someone who's looking to make Aliyah, at the different stages, or, someone who's currently, has made Aliyah but needs a little bit of help?
Yeah. I don't know, for someone coming, I think the important things are to know financially, again, just speaking financially, their earning potential here is important. Certain industries are very strong here. That you just get a sense by speaking to if they have friends or colleagues that work here, and get a sense of what they could earn and network and just talk to people. I mean, obviously, you have to do that to find out where you would want to live and what neighborhood and what city or whatever as well. But that's an important part of it, on the income side and the expense side also. And then for someone here also, I mean, it's just important if you're working here to really make sure you know what all your benefits are. And there's a pay slip here. It's called a tlush. It sometimes is very complicated, and a lot of people get it every month and they just don't even look. It's important to know really what you're earning, what your benefits are, and make sure you're maximizing them, and just the regular financial planning that someone would do in America, which they'd be more familiar with because it's in English and because maybe they grew up with it. They should make the effort to really, whether it means coming to me or someone else, or just Googling around or asking friends or looking on Facebook. They should really try to make sure they understand that stuff, I think, because it's a significant amount of your earnings, of your assets, and has a lot of really long-term ramifications. So we look at that stuff when you can, every now and then.
Yeah, but it sounds like everything is very doable, and you make everything very simple, which is a very good thing.
Yeah, we think it's doable. The earnings is an issue. People have to figure out how to make money, but there's a lot of opportunity here. So we encourage people to keep coming and reach out to us if we can help them.
Good. Thank you very much for joining us. It was very informative. I really learned a lot.
Okay, thank you both very much. Wish you both lots of luck, and look forward to seeing a lot of more interesting things come from you. All right, take care.
We hope to have you back. Thanks.
Okay, no problem.
Bye.
Thank you for listening. A little about us. I'm your co-host Darren May, and I'm a marketing professional. I'm the head of marketing automation at National Positions, one of the top digital marketing agencies in the world. I love anything to do with marketing and business.
And I'm your co-host Joseph Miller. I'm an avid follower of the financial markets, and I have a degree in finance. I'm also the founder and CEO of international e-commerce conglomerate Without a P Enterprise. We are unapologetically Without a P since 2018. Make sure to like and subscribe and check out our website, pureconversation.com.